At exactly 2 a.m., the 911 operator's headset crackled to life. On the other end, a soft, trembling voice barely whispered, "My belly is moving." The operator's fingers hovered above the keyboard as a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't an ordinary call. The voice, small and innocent, sounded like a child, yet there was an unsettling tension in the air, a weight to her words that made his pulse quicken. He paused, realizing something was terribly wrong. She wasn't just scared, she was hiding something. But what was it? What could be happening to a little girl that would make her say such a thing? The operator's thoughts raced, and though he tried to keep his voice calm, the unease was palpable. The night was eerily still, yet the voice on the other end held a mystery that was about to unravel, a secret that would soon consume the entire town. Everyone would be drawn into this unsettling puzzle, a mystery so strange it would leave them in disbelief. But for now, all he could do was listen as the fear in the girl's voice echoed in his ears, knowing that whatever was happening, it was far more than he could comprehend in this moment. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in a small town when the phone in the Maplewood Emergency Dispatch Center rang. The clock on the wall read 10:43 a.m., and Sarah Miller, a seasoned dispatcher with 15 years of experience, grabbed her headset. The voice that came through was unlike any she had ever heard. A soft, shaky whisper, almost imperceptible, broke the silence. A little girl, barely audible, said something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. The word sent a chill down her spine. "My belly is moving." Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was no ordinary call. It was strange, unsettling even. The quiet tremor in the child's voice made it clear that something was wrong, but Sarah couldn't quite place what it was. She quickly gathered herself and spoke calmly, asking the little girl her name. The voice on the other end responded softly, "Nora." Sarah's mind raced. A 6-year-old girl, alone in a bathroom, calling 911 because her belly was moving? It didn't make sense. Yet the fear in Nora's voice was unmistakable. Sarah asked where she was, trying to keep the conversation as normal as possible. "In the school bathroom," came the reply. The words felt out of place. Something was off, but Sarah couldn't put her finger on it. She reassured Nora, keeping her voice steady, asking if she was hurt, if anyone was with her. There was no response except for the child's faint, shaky breath. Nora was alone. She continued to explain that her belly kept moving, and she was scared. Sarah's instincts kicked in as she signaled for her supervisor to get involved. This wasn't a routine call. Something deeper was going on. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the silence as Sarah's mind raced. She quickly gathered the information she needed and dispatched a team to the school. Within moments, the school principal and the nurse arrived at the bathroom where Nora was holed up. The hallway echoed with their hurried steps as they reached the bathroom door. Inside, Nora sat in the last stall, her small frame curled up in the corner, clutching her swollen stomach. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She barely looked up as the principal gently called her name. Nora's soft whisper came again. "My belly. It keeps moving." The nurse kneeled beside her, checking her temperature, her brow furrowing in concern. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Something was wrong, and the silence only made it more terrifying. As Nora was carefully carried to the ambulance, she clutched her stomach tightly, her wide eyes filled with an anxiety that no child should have to experience. She asked the paramedic if they could make the movement stop. No one spoke. The sirens wailed as the ambulance raced toward the hospital. Meanwhile, at the school, the staff exchanged whispered words, trying to piece together what was happening. They couldn't understand what was going on with Nora, and neither could Sarah, who now sat in the dispatch center, unable to shake the nagging feeling that something darker was unfolding. The quiet mystery of the little girl's moving belly would soon lead them all down a path they never expected, and no one would be prepared for what came next. At the hospital, Nora was carefully laid down on the examination table. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the constant beeping of machines was a harsh reminder of the seriousness of the situation. Dr. Chen, a seasoned pediatrician, observed the young girl with growing concern. Nora's belly was noticeably distended, far beyond what was normal for a child of her age. Her pale, drawn face looked like it hadn't seen a peaceful night's sleep in weeks. Despite the warmth of the hospital room, Nora shivered slightly, her small body trembling with fear. Dr. Chen gently moved to the child's side, her eyes scanning the small frame in front of her. The soft whimper Nora gave was a stark contrast to the composed demeanor of the medical staff. The child was clearly scared, and that fear echoed in the way she clutched her stomach protectively. Dr. Chen's hands were steady as she conducted her examination, but inside, her mind was racing. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it wasn't just physical. Nora's body was telling them a story, one that Dr. Chen wasn't yet sure she was ready to hear. After a few moments of silence, Dr. Chen spoke gently, trying to pull information from the frightened girl. Nora's voice was barely a whisper, barely audible over the soft hum of the machines surrounding them. She described the pain in her belly, how sometimes it felt like something was moving inside, like the flutter of a butterfly. Her words were tinged with confusion, as though she herself didn't understand what was happening to her. As Nora continued to speak, Dr. Chen's concern deepened. The more she listened, the clearer it became that there was something far more serious happening than a simple stomach issue. The symptoms weren't matching up with anything she had seen before. Nora was malnourished. Her small, frail frame told that story without words. Her swollen belly didn't fit the typical pattern of a digestive issue. Dr. Chen knew there was something more at play here. As she examined the records that had been rushed over from the school, her worry only grew. Nora was living with her grandmother, Beatrice, who had been diagnosed with dementia some months ago. But this wasn't just a case of an ill child. Nora was forced to care for herself. No parents, no other adults who could look after her. Her grandmother, a shell of the woman she had once been, was unable to provide the care that Nora so desperately needed. Nora had been left to fend for herself, preparing her own meals, finding whatever she could in the cabinets, and trying to soothe her own pain without understanding the danger she was in. As Dr. Chen processed the information, she realized how severe the situation was. The little girl had been silently suffering for who knows how long. The neglected state of her health, the swelling of her abdomen, the self-medication with whatever she could find in the house. It all painted a picture of neglect, not just physical, but emotional. Dr. Chen carefully made her notes, her mind working quickly to piece together a plan for immediate care. But no matter what they did now, it would be a long, difficult road to recovery for Nora. A child, alone in the world, burdened with responsibilities far too heavy for her small shoulders. And yet, as Dr. Chen looked down at the frightened, brave face in front of her, she knew one thing for sure. Nora wasn't just physically unwell. The emotional scars of neglect and loneliness ran deep, and it would take more than medicine to heal her. Ellie, once Nora's kindergarten teacher, had always felt a special connection with the little girl. After hearing about Nora's condition, she couldn't simply stand by. Ellie knew that something wasn't right, and she was determined to help. She decided to visit Nora's home to see for herself the conditions in which the girl was living. The house stood in disrepair, a faded blue cottage hidden behind overgrown bushes. The paint had peeled off the wooden siding, and the porch sagged in places, a clear sign of years of neglect. Ellie knocked on the door, her heart heavy with what she might discover inside. When it creaked open, she was greeted by an elderly woman with clouded eyes and silver hair. It was Nora's grandmother, Beatrice, who barely seemed aware of Ellie's presence. Ellie stepped inside, her eyes scanning the cluttered living room. Piles of newspapers sat untouched in corners, and the air was thick with the smell of neglect. The television blared, but no one was watching. The room felt frozen in time, as if the world outside had continued. But here, things had stopped moving. Ellie moved cautiously through the house, noting the condition of the kitchen. The countertops were cluttered with stale dishes, and the refrigerator barely held anything except expired condiments. A sense of sadness settled over her as she saw the environment in which Nora had been forced to grow up. The little girl had no choice but to take care of herself. As Ellie ventured further into the house, she stumbled upon a series of empty medicine boxes in the bathroom. Some were half-used, others completely empty. The remnants of the medications told a story of self-medication. Ellie's heart sank as she realized that Nora, in her desperation, had been trying to care for herself without understanding the dangers. The boxes were scattered haphazardly, some with faint fingerprints on them. The child had no one to guide her, no adult to help her understand the complexities of the medications she had found. Ellie could only imagine how terrified Nora must have been, trying to manage the pain in her belly on her own, without knowing what was truly wrong. As Ellie explored further, she found a step stool in the bathroom, placed just below the medicine cabinet, evidence of how Nora had tried to reach the bottles. It was clear now that Nora's condition had been the result of neglect, both physical and emotional. Nora had been left to her own devices, trying to survive in a home where even the basics, food, medicine, care, were lacking. The truth was starting to unravel, and with it, Ellie began to realize just how deep the scars ran. Nora wasn't just suffering from an illness. She had been silently enduring a life of isolation and fear. As Ellie continued to search the house, the weight of Nora's daily struggle became painfully clear. No child should have to bear such burdens, and Ellie knew she couldn't leave this house without making sure that Nora would never have to face it alone again. At the hospital, Nora was subjected to a series of tests. The medical staff worked quickly, trying to understand the cause of her distended abdomen. Dr. Chen reviewed the results, her brow furrowing with concern. The tests revealed a disturbing truth. Nora had been taking adult-strength medications, which had severely affected her digestive system. The medications, designed for much older individuals, had caused the bloating and discomfort she had been experiencing. Dr. Chen explained this to Nora gently, her voice soft but serious, as she tried to make the child understand. The physical symptoms, while alarming, were not caused by something inside her. There was no mysterious presence or unseen danger. It was the result of improper medication use, a mistake born of desperation and ignorance. But as Dr. Chen continued her examination, she could see that the problem wasn't just physical. Nora was more than just a sick child. Her fragile state, her trembling hands, her wide, fearful eyes, spoke of emotional trauma that went beyond her health. The weight of neglect, isolation, and the fear of being alone had etched deep scars into her small frame. Nora's condition was not just a physical manifestation of self-medication, but a reflection of her emotional and mental distress. She had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long, trying to manage her pain and fear alone. Ellie, standing off to the side, watched the interaction with growing concern. She knew Nora needed more than just medical care. She needed someone to help her heal emotionally, someone who could provide stability and love. Ellie had always been a teacher, a guide, but she felt helpless in the face of this overwhelming situation. She couldn't stand by and let Nora continue to suffer. The realization hit her like a wave. She couldn't let the child return to the environment that had caused so much pain. She made up her mind right then and there. Ellie would do whatever it took to take Nora in, to offer her a home where she would be safe and cared for. But the road ahead wasn't simple. There was the issue of custody and the bureaucratic hurdles of the system to navigate. She needed to go through the legal channels to ensure Nora's well-being. There would be paperwork, investigations, and assessments to face. But Ellie wasn't deterred. The thought of Nora returning to that neglected home, where the young girl would be left to fend for herself again, was unbearable. Ellie knew she had to act quickly before the system failed her. As Nora lay in the hospital bed, her eyes slowly fluttering closed from the exhaustion of the day, Ellie silently promised that she would be the one to help her. She would be the one to provide Nora with a future where she wouldn't have to carry such pain alone. This was the moment when everything would change for Nora. And for Ellie. Ellie had always dreamed of a quiet, peaceful life. But when Nora entered her world, everything shifted. The house, which once felt lonely and empty, now had the warmth of purpose. Ellie made sure to transform a small room into a sanctuary for Nora. She decorated the walls with soft, calming colors, arranged a little desk by the window, and placed a bed in the center, topped with a new, cozy blanket. The room was simple, but it was hers. It was a space where Nora could heal, a place where she would finally feel safe. Ellie worked diligently, arranging the space with tenderness and care, as if to tell Nora without words that she was welcome, that this was her new home. When Nora was brought to the room, she hesitated at first, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. She stood still, almost as if she expected to wake up from a dream. But the longer she stayed in the room, the more the weight of her fear started to lift. Nora carefully touched the bed, running her fingers along the soft fabric of the comforter. She looked up at Ellie, her voice quiet and filled with disbelief. The thought of having a room all to herself, a space free of the chaos and neglect she had known, was something Nora had never imagined possible. Ellie smiled softly, reassuring the girl that this was just the beginning of her new life. As the days passed, Nora started to adjust to the new environment. Ellie made sure to keep a steady routine, filling their days with small, comforting activities that gave Nora a sense of stability. She made sure Nora had meals on time, took her to doctor's appointments, and even scheduled sessions with the child psychologist to help Nora process the emotional turmoil she had endured. Though at first, Nora was shy and withdrawn, she slowly began to open up. The therapy sessions, though challenging, helped her start to articulate the pain she had hidden for so long. For the first time, Nora began to understand that her fears were valid and that it was okay to feel them. It wasn't easy for Nora to let go of her past fears, but with Ellie's constant presence, the child began to feel a slow shift in her heart. Every small act of kindness Ellie showed was a step towards healing. Slowly, Nora started to trust again. She began to smile more, especially when she found comfort in her new routine. She enjoyed simple things, the warmth of the kitchen when Ellie cooked dinner, the quiet moments they shared together before bed, the way Ellie read her stories and tucked her in at night. Nora no longer feared being alone. The constant anxiety that had weighed on her shoulders for so long began to fade. She felt the love and care that Ellie offered, and for the first time, Nora allowed herself to accept it. The girl had suffered so much, but Ellie's presence was a steady anchor in a storm that had once seemed endless. As the days turned into weeks, Nora's transformation was evident. Her once distant eyes began to show more light, and her nervous energy began to give way to moments of peace. She was beginning to realize that this life, this new chapter with Ellie, wasn't a dream. It was real. And for the first time in her life, she felt safe. The road to recovery was still long, but with Ellie by her side, Nora knew that she wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead, one step at a time. Months passed since Nora had first stepped into Ellie's home, and the process of securing her future was finally coming to an end. Ellie had fought tirelessly, navigating the complicated maze of legal proceedings to ensure that Nora would never have to face her difficult past again. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the atmosphere inside the courthouse was tense, yet there was a sense of anticipation. Nora, dressed in a simple but neat dress, sat nervously beside Ellie. Her small hands fidgeted in her lap as she looked around the room. The proceedings began, and Ellie's heart raced in her chest. She had done everything she could to provide a stable home for Nora, but today was the day when the court would decide whether or not they could finally make their bond official. The judge, a woman with a kind yet no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. Ellie stood, her voice steady but emotional, as she answered the judge's questions about her ability to care for Nora. The judge asked about the steps Ellie had taken to ensure Nora's well-being, and Ellie spoke about the therapy, the medical care, and the love that had filled their home since Nora had arrived. Nora, sitting quietly, looked up at Ellie with trust in her eyes. She had come a long way from the frightened girl who had arrived in the hospital months ago. Her life had been transformed, and she now had a family, a future, and the love of someone who cared deeply for her. When it was Nora's turn to speak, she stood up and faced the judge. Her small voice, once so timid, now carried with it a sense of quiet strength. She told the court, with sincerity and confidence, that she wanted to stay with Ellie. She spoke about how Ellie took care of her, how she no longer felt scared, and how Ellie had become the person she could count on no matter what. For the first time in a long while, Nora wasn't afraid of her future. The judge listened intently, nodding in approval as Nora spoke. When the hearing concluded, the decision was made. The court ruled in favor of granting Ellie temporary guardianship, making it official. Nora was finally going to stay with the woman who had given her a chance at a new life. The weight that had hung over Ellie's heart since the beginning of this journey lifted as the final paperwork was signed. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, and the air felt fresh with the promise of new beginnings. Word of the court's decision spread quickly through Maplewood. The town had watched Nora's story unfold, and now the community came together to support the little girl who had endured so much. People from all walks of life reached out, offering their help in restoring Nora's family home. The house, which had once been a symbol of neglect and hardship, was now a place of hope and possibility. Volunteers arrived to fix the roof, clean the yard, and make the home a safe place for Nora to visit whenever she wanted. The town embraced her, offering support in any way they could. As Ellie and Nora returned to their home, they both felt a deep sense of peace. Nora's life had been irrevocably changed, but so had Ellie's. They had found each other at the moment when they both needed it most, and now they could look forward to the future together. There would be challenges ahead, but the bond between them was unbreakable. As the days turned into weeks and the seasons shifted, Nora's world became brighter. The shadows of her past no longer had a hold on her, and she finally felt like she was where she belonged. With Ellie by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. And for the first time in a long time, Nora looked toward the future with hope, her heart light with the knowledge that she was loved and cared for, always.